Welcome everybody today to this info share provided by GÉANT, more specifically from Edith Herzog and myself from the EU Liaison team. And the topic today for this info share is going to focus on how NRENs can benefit from EU funding at the national level. So just once again, welcome. Here's the agenda for the info share. I will start off by giving an introduction to the topic and then an explanation of European structural and investment funding. And at the end of that section, we're hoping that Alberto will be able to give us a brief summary of how Rediris has benefited from this type of funding in Spain, because it's really good to hear from another NREN by word of mouth how these subjects work at the national level. And after that point, I'll be handing over to Edith Herzog, who will be giving an explanation of next generation EU funding, or NGEU. And following that, we will finalize with some questions about this topic in general and where you see areas which could be developed and so on and so forth. Before we begin, I'd like to say that this info share is focused towards European NRENs, because the type of funding we're discussing here today is really applicable to NRENs situated within the European Union. But if you're from an entity outside of that territory, please feel welcome to stay, and we hope that you find this interesting. So, to give a brief introduction, the EU Liaison team has been reporting for quite a while now to members, be that via info shares or via the EOSC NREN info share series we have, or at the General Assembly, matters related to European level funding, projects and legislative matters. And that's already been quite a wide scope as the environment's become quite complicated over the last few years. So not only do we focus on the FFPA and the future regarding GM5, but we've also been holding information sessions on EOSC and EuroHPC and these topics. But we're now looking to additionally communicate on initiatives where European funding is available at the national and regional level. So to keep this very simple, this is money which is either within the European budget or money which is organized at the European level in Brussels, but it's to be implemented, either at the regional or at the national level within your countries and localities. And this could be of real benefit to NRENs, because it's just a different approach to seeing how, provided the right initiatives are targeted or proposed, NRENs could find extra funding and extra opportunities closer to home, but they're still being helped from the European side as such. And this is funding that originates from the budget of the EU, or it's coordinated with the programs at the European level, but it's distributed throughout the 27 European member states with a specific purpose in mind. And this is normally managed by local ministries or agencies. It's worth pointing out that over 76% of the EU budget is managed in partnership with national and regional authorities through a system which is referred to as shared management. So here's a diagram which it does two things really. It firstly shows that there are a host of funds at different levels which target different areas, and they have different funding mechanisms available from the European level. So it shows that it's quite a complex landscape, but it also does go to show how we have different layers of where the funding is accessible and where it can be applied. So not to go into too much detail, but just as a explanation, if you look at the top left here at Horizon Europe, this is really research and infrastructure funding. We're used to what Horizon Europe is from within GÉANT and the community, because the GM4 project is funded by Horizon 2020, which is the Horizon Europe is the successor program to that. And then below that, we have co-finance fund, So these are funds which are contributed to by the member states, and CEF stands for the Connecting Europe Facility and DEP stands for the Digital Europe Programme. But as we go further down the table, we have the funding mechanisms which are firstly not directly linked to the MFF, so the main European budget, but also funding which is to go directly to national agencies, the type of funding we're talking about today. And this includes the Recovery and Resilience Facility, which Edith will be talking about later on in the agenda, and the European Regional and Development Fund and cohesion funding. And that's really going to be the focus of this next part of the presentation. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to raise your hand or verbally interrupt me. So if we're talking about these funds which are accessible at the national regional level, the section of funding, the overall term, is called the structural and investment funds historically, and they are made up of 5 main funds. So we have the Fund for European Regional and Development. So this is focusing on regional and urban development. You have the European Social Fund, which is focusing on social inclusion and good governance. The Cohesion Fund, which is economic convergence programs for less developed regions. And by less developed, it means below 90% of the average European GDP percentage. So just below that threshold. And then the latter two, which probably are not applicable in much of a way to NRENs, are the European Agricultural Fund for Rural Development and the European Maritime and Fishery Funds. So those 5 main funds make up these locally available or available funding areas. And the names you see there, this was the setup of the funds from 2014 to 2020. So in other words, the current MFF or the multi-annual financial framework. During the next MFF, which will run hopefully from 2021 to 2027, I'm not sure how many of you are keeping in touch with the Brussels-based news, but as of yesterday, I think it was, or maybe the day before, the MFF, so this is the main European funding cycle, has been, it's currently still being debated by at the Parliament, at the Council, but essentially there has to be some agreement between the majority of member states and Poland and Hungary to finalize and stamp off the funding tranche for the period after that. So we will have to keep an eye on how that's going to develop over the next month and a half. However, when we're talking about these funds, there will be a slight change as proposed in the MFF to how they're going to react, especially in relation to the COVID-19 pandemic. So in the future, the successors to these 5 local regional funds, plus OR, which stands for the outermost EU regions, that was also in the previous framework, it will continue, it will stay the same. So what I'm about to speak about in the next slide will roughly remain the same for the next MFF. Maybe there'll be some changes in terminology, but that should be as far as it goes. However, there is now something called the Next Generation EU Fund, and this is under a intergovernmental arrangement. So it's separate to the European Union's budget, where EU money is essentially spent either at the national level or the European level, but it is a fund which has been put together by the member states primarily to focus on reinvigorating Europe's economies after the COVID-19 pandemic, but also focusing on sustainable initiatives in light of that. The main instrument of the NGEU, Next Generation EU Fund, is something called the Recovery and Resilience Facility, RRF. And this is around about 560 billion euros proposed, available across the member states. But it's available for the next 3 years only in order to make sure that that funding reaches the right places quickly. And Edith will cover this later in the agenda. But I think it pays just quickly to give an example of how NRENs can benefit from the traditional structural investment funds. And I'm going to use the example of the European Regional and Development Fund. So if you see at the top bullet and the sub-bullets there, its main focus is on innovation and research, the digital agenda, support for SMEs, and a low carbon economy. So there are clearly areas within that where NRENs have a real role to play. And grants from the European Regional Development Fund are awarded not by a DG in Brussels. This isn't something which you would talk to a DG about. This is more that you go towards a managing authority at the national and regional level. And it's possible for NRENs at this level to identify operational programs with that managing authority and at the national level or regional level to make a proposed project. And the new set of these operational programs, provided the MFF is passed, should start at the beginning of 2021. So there's going to be, from the traditional investment funds, structural and investment funds, there will be a new agenda beginning at the start of the next year. And it's really important to highlight this to NRENs, because as soon as that information is available, that you should be able to find or pinpoint regional or local initiatives where you could secure money from a fund such as this to help your own needs. In terms of eligibility, public bodies, universities, associations, and NGOs are eligible to apply for these funds. So as a result of that classification, it's quite clear that NRENs qualify to apply for funds under the European Regional and Development Fund, as an example. But it's good to hear a practical example as to how projects such as these have been a success in the past. So I would like to ask Alberto if he would like to chip in now and just give a verbal update as to how a similar project worked in Spain. You're muted, Alberto.
Okay, thank you very much, Hendrik, and apologies for not having been able to prepare some set of slides. I had a very tight deadline with the Director General, the budget 2021, 22, 23, in a changing environment, in great part due to the European funds. So I just finished that meeting a few minutes ago, but I will try to pass something that can be later distributed to the colleagues. In our case, we were one of the very few NRENs in Europe by 2008 that we did not have any kind of dark fiber on the network. So we had a very ambitious project to change and hire IRUs for the network, but this was very costly for a country the size of Spain. But we ended up setting up a project in 2008 with European funds, regional development funds, federal funds, for the period 2007-2013, and it was a project of 105 million euros, and finally the federal funds covered 50 million out of the 105. So nearly 50% of the cost of the project. It was quite groundbreaking at the time because we had different problems. First, at that time, there was a great focus that federal funds had to fund infrastructure, and it was not clear that IRUs could be eligible and accepted as infrastructure when it's a long-term lease of fiber. But it's such a long term, in our case, 21 and 30 years, that it was considered as infrastructure because usually the life cycle of the duration of the fiber is around 20 years. So it's like deploying new fiber, but it's not exactly the same as owning your own fiber, but you somehow own a pair of fibers in a big number of fibers deployed by the provider. And then we hire our own equipment and light the dark fiber and manage it. So, well, we had some debate around this concept, and it was quite complicated, but it was accepted, and we have had no problem ever since. We shared this experience with some colleagues. I remember colleagues from Arnes in Slovenia that they were not accepting IRUs as eligible for this kind of funding, but at the end of the day, it was accepted. We tried to provide our own example because we have had several audits from the European Commission for this, and we passed all of them. Then those funds in that time, 2007, 2013, were only available in poorer regions in Spain and not in the rest of the country. So we end up deploying all the shared elements of the infrastructure in these areas where there was a lot of FEDER available. And so if you look at our network, the topology of the network, there are a lot of points of presence in southern Spain and very few in Madrid and northern Spain. But it was a compromise we had to reach to be able to use all that funding that really made a big difference. It's a network of 15,000 kilometers, including submarine fiber, with 90 POPs and 110 amplifiers. So it's quite substantial. And we think we got a very good price for a long period, 21 years in the peninsula and 30 years with the Canary Islands and Baleares. We had to reach also a compromise which, as I said, which areas were more covered than others and had more or less POPs. So we set up a program to bring fiber to new locations, to some centers that could not be covered by the initial footprint of the initial tender. That was through a competitive dialogue, the initial tender, so it was quite complex. We proposed 150 POPs, but we only got around 70 initially. So over the years, we have reached agreements to deploy 20 new POPs. Typically, we do procurement as a service. We have FEDER funds in our hand that we get from the Commission and from the Spanish ministries, as we are part of one ministry. And then we ask national research centers or universities to put the national part. In this second period, 2013-2020, all regions were eligible, so that makes it quite easy and allow new centers to be included. But some had more coverage than others. In some, FEDER funds cover 80%, up to 85% in the Canary Islands, and in other regions it was 50%. But as it was more broadly available, we have done new deployments using this scheme. We get national part from the center, we put the FEDER, we procure, and we give the center the equipment and the fiber. And so new centers are covered. And now we had FEDER funds to keep on doing this, but these FEDER funds were taken from us in July to be used for COVID-19 funding. So even though we had secure European funds to make more deployments of that fiber to new centers, we lost that money in July because the money was to be used for COVID-19. So that was really bad news because we had several new deployments planned for more than 20 million euros, and the centers really relied on that funding to make those key investments. So we somehow were letting them down when all this was stopped. But on the other hand, with the money coming from the Recovery and Resilience Facility, now we are being told that we are going to receive the money that was taken from us, but this new money will be available in all regions, even the richer ones, and will cover 100% of the funding. So our partners would not have to put 20 or 50%. Some agreements were in jeopardy because of the crisis, they initially planned that they would have the national park, but now they were not sure. And it's possible that in a couple of months' time, we will bring them the good news that all that was planned can be done with no cost for them and covered at 100% from funds coming from the resilience, recovery and resilience facility. So we're definitely making, well, and it's important also that we're using a sizable part of these funds with the regional networks. As you all know, because you are NRENs, we have a backbone. Some of you also provide local loops, but we don't. So we have to rely on regional networks to have more capillarity and in-campus networks. But so we have a very good backbone, but underneath us, our users have to manage themselves. We don't want to leave them alone. We want to avoid bottlenecks. We want to help them. So it's a great opportunity for us to get these European funds and use them for the regional networks and also for centers, but in particular, regional networks because they have a multiplier effect. If you upgrade those regional networks, many centers benefit from it. So we have very close cooperation. There are 10 regional networks in Spain, and we have in agenda projects with 7 of them, and we have had projects with all of them in the past. And with this money from the Recovery and Resilience Fund, we expect to upgrade the regional networks to 100 gigabit as our backbone and to make some deployments that they need to have a more redundancy and have rings. So it's a great opportunity. Of course, we had this experience in the past and we have been able to be in the agenda. And when all this money is coming from the European Union, mainly focused on digitation and green economy, part of the money for digitation, we have raised our hand and they have thought of us and they have put us in the map and they have reserved money from us. It's not 100% certain that we will be getting this money, but it's very, very likely that it would be somehow included in the budget to be approved in January, even though this is still being discussed in Europe right now. So the government in Spain want to really push the economy through this recovery fund facility, and they want us to start somehow tendering on the basis of the money that is due to come, but they are willing to give it to us from January, even if this is not closed at European level. So this is our experience. It's of course, you have to develop some specific knowledge that we don't have in our department, but our colleagues of administration and finance are very much experts in certifying and going through the audits of the European Commission. We belong to a body, Red.es. Red.es is a department, and Red.es is very much focused on spending this kind of money. So they have a good complementary knowledge. We do the technical part, and they can take care of the administrative part that is quite important. To be present in the negotiations, to get the money, and then to deliver and be able to certify everything properly, and then go through the audits. So this is our experience. It has definitely helped us a lot. We are very short on manpower, but we have enough funding to have a good infrastructure and even to help others in our environment to improve their infrastructures.
Thank you.
Let me just add that with this money, we are also somehow paying the renewal of the optical IP equipment, DDoS equipment, and we have an internal project of 35 million euros to upgrade our equipment and infrastructure. And then, as I said, more than 20 millions to improve the infrastructure of others. So it's quite sizable projects. And I said, we lack staff. We are only 17 people, but we do have quite a lot of money at our disposal, and in great part, thanks to these European funds.
Thanks, Alberto. I think that's really informative, and it's really good to hear, because it's especially going to link with the next part of the presentation. But before I go there, I think if I just think backwards to highlight 3 things. So at the beginning, I think it was a really important point that you said that through the work with the auditors and the administrative experts, you could highlight that you were eligible for the regional funds back in 2007, I think you said 2008, but you used that process to help NRENs in Slovenia, I think is what you said. And this type of dynamic is going to be really important to highlight for next year. And beyond that, if NRENs want to start showing how they qualify for either the regional funds or the next generation EU funds, so under the RRF. So that was good. I also think it's quite important to point out that you began these conversations back in 2007, 2008 with the local authorities. That was the MFF before this MFF, but the dialogue continued with those stakeholders after that MFF. So it's not such a short-term relationship. It can actually go on, provided a good project and relationship is established. And I think the fact that the very end of what I hear you say, that that chunk of funding was taken away because of the COVID situation, but it's actually coming back to you through the NGEU fund, so the RRF, in a way which is actually maybe even more beneficial to your network than before. So yeah, so it shows how it's a changing landscape, but it's also comes with opportunities. So exactly. Thank you very much for explaining that example. And I think that's a good moment to now hand over to Edith, because she's going to be talking about the RRF funds, so the newer type of funding as such. If you're there, Edith.
Thank you, Henrik. May I ask you to change the slide to the slide? So the next generation EU, maybe before I start, I'd like to say that Alberto said something which could be the title of this part. We raised our hand to signal our government that we are here and eligible for the fund. I think that this is the aim of this part of the presentation, to help you to understand that why and how you can raise your hand to get access to the Recovery and Resilience Fund, which is an intergovernmental tool of the EU member states once it's approved. It is interconnected with the MFF on its voting. Yeah, so unless the MFF will be voted, the next generation EU cannot. Yeah, they are connected, and they will be voted together once upon a time when the governments can agree on this. The process just stopped, and we hope that it's for a short time. And the next generation EU is not only not an EU tool, but intergovernmental tool, but it's also just there for a very short period of time. So it's not for 7 years, it's only for 3 years to come, starting in January 2021. So it's a short term, 2021, 22, and 23, and then this opportunity will disappear. The main directions of the next generation EU, small part is inserted to the running MFF. Some part is inserted to the new MFF, which will start in 2021. And the biggest part, as Henrik already said, is a recovery and the resilience facility. And as you see in the first page, it was 560 billion. That was the original Commission proposal. But during the negotiation between the European Parliament and the member states, the final number is 672.5 billion euros. So it's actually increased by 100 billion. It's called facility, so it's not fund, and it's important. So whenever you see the word facility, you know that this is about the resilience facility, which is not part of the budget and do not follow the budgetary procedure. We can go to the next page. So the total sum is 672.5 billion, and the 312.5 billion is in the form of grants, and the other 360 billion is in loans. For you, for NRENs, most likely the loan is not something interesting because it's more for the economic private stakeholders and sectors. So for NRENs, the money available is from the 312.5 billion euro. But if you compare that the European Regional Development Fund for this period is 196 billion, so it's a one scale bigger amount of money. And if you think that it's only for 3 years, while the 196 for the European Regional Development Fund is for 7 years, it shows that how big is this money which will be injected to generate the economic stimulus in Europe. So it's a huge opportunity, but it's a one of the kind opportunity which will not be followed afterwards. The amount of the money is predefined by countries. So the countries already aware that how much money they have. There is a slide I will show you per country for the first 2 years. It cannot transfer to any other countries during the years. So if the money is not spent, then the money belongs to the member state normal budget. So it cannot be moved from one country to the other. While it is a fresh money, is not part of the EU budget, and for you it's not important for the first look because it's a money, yeah? It's a fresh money, but it follows a very different decision-making process, namely the European semester. The European semester is measuring the European economic success. It is therefore already a decade, and the economic players and the member states are kind of familiar with it. But it is new for the NREN community because research is not a major part of this European semester package. It will be through country reports approved by the European Commission. And it's not under shared management like the European Regional Development Fund, but it's under the direct European Commission management. In short term, 3 rounds, 1 round 2021, 22, 23. We can go to the next slide. Oops. So the scope is economic stimulus, and therefore the primary target is to restart the economy. But it can be used for national research and education infrastructure investment if you explain in the country report that why it is part of it. And this is what very much Alberto said, that we raised our hands and we signaled to the government that we are under this scope matters. So the countries who will not be proactively engaged maybe will be forgotten to the traditional players of the European semesters. Because they are used to it, yeah. As I said, the European semester is 10 years or over 10 years old, so the economic players are somehow used to it and benefiting from it. It's new for the NRENs, and you can include not only the NRENs but the research infrastructures and the universities who are also potential beneficiaries. Therefore, my advice would be that you go and offer the entire research and innovation sector, and including the education to the country reports to be in this program. It can be used as a member state contribution to other funds like the Connecting Europe facility and the Digital Europe program facility. So you can even multiply the amount if you wish, but it's the member states who have to ask for it. And yeah, so what I can say in this moment, but once you look the template, which is in the last page of the presentation, the last 2 pages on the presentation, you will see from the documentation that actually the European Commission will help you to drive to those projects which are already under the multi-annual financial framework. Yeah, so actually, if you can align those in the recovery fund with those who are under the multi-annual financial framework, then you can create the synergies. I put here also the webpage. You can read more about the research, the recovery and resilience facility. We can go to the next page. I'd like to explain you the process. As I said, the process is different than for the normal budgetary procedure, and it will be different for 2021 and 2022. And the normal procedure for the European semester, that the countries have to make their country report to the European Commission by October 15. And because this deadline is already passed before the resilience funds are adopted by the Council, of course, it cannot be kept. It means that the country report are going to be discussed from the moment when the multi-annual financial framework and the next generation EU is finally approved by the European Council. And then it will be a dialogue with the Commission until April about the plan. Latest in April, the Commission has to give approval for the plan. There is no procedure yet defined for those plans which do not pass the criteria of the Commission. So I cannot, but hopefully it's not a hope for everyone to create a plan which will not get finally financed. But for those projects, they are financed. It will be an implementing act at the end of the procedure, which means that the Commission evaluates the plan within 2 months, creating the suggestion for decision, and then the Council says yes. And then the member states have to implement the project. And then after, it will be similar in the way to the regional development funds, that once the project is done and the invoices has been introduced, the Commission is going to pay. I think that this is very important for Spain, because Spain will be the first country, as far as I understood from the European Commission, to come with the draft plan. And then it will be, after April, open for delivery, open for implementation. Can we go for the next slide, please? So it is the process. The member states introduce the draft recovery and resilience plans. The EC approves it or send it back to the country. So it will be a dialogue by end of April. And then the EC adopts the implementing act, which will be approved by the Council. So the implementing act is something the Council approves. Special attention will be for the impact. Yeah, it has to deliver on the green and digital. And actually the Council, the last European Council, introduced the bar for digital. So minimum 20% of the projects have to go for digitalization of the country. So it's not business as usual. It's not something that you buy a new computer for your office kind of thing. Yeah, so it's really looking for modernization. The member states implement the programs as they agreed in the plan, and then payment against the delivery is the next, is of course comes after. Yeah, so we can go to the next. So the recovery and resilience facility, how much it is? Actually, it is for 3 years, but the calculation for the first 2 years for 70% of the funds is different than for the third year. And I have to tell you that the Council is still working on it. They have got a calculation already ready for the first 2 years. The special rules are not yet done, so the work in progress about the detailed rules. About the payment, so the invoices, the invoices can be introduced continuously, but it will be a biannual payment. Twice a year, the Commission finally will release the money for the countries. And they have to comply with the EU law, especially fraud and corruption, as well as the rule of law. I'm not going to the detail of the rule of law because you can follow it from the press. It is possible to disrupt or terminate the project by the Commission earlier if something goes wrong. And the last information around the finance, that all the payments from the Commission to the member state must be done before 31st of December 2026. Yeah, we can go to the next slide. So the connection between the European regional development funds and the NGEU, one opportunity that the member states can choose to transfer money from the shared management to the facility. It's up to the member state to decide. Of course, the question arises that why the member state would transfer something from the national agency to the European institution. And the answer is very easy: to accelerate the payment of the usage of these European regional development funds, because the European regional development funds can be used in 7 years' time. So if you wish to front load this money, then it has sense to put them under the recovery fund, otherwise not. Yeah, so that's the easy answer for this question. We can go to the next slide. Here the number, here is the money. I cut the table out from the council conclusion, maybe not really PowerPoint friendly, but just to show you that how much money the countries are entitled to get. And it has a different direction, like the European Regional Development Funds. It very much goes to south, while some of the cohesion funds especially go more for east. So you can look at a bit like a compensation for the lost cohesion funds for the south countries. So it's a kind of equilibrium between south and east. I do not know. It will depend on the plans that how much the money will be divided between 2021 and 2022. But what is important, of course, that the next plan, the plan for 2022, has to be introduced by October 15. Yeah, thank you. We can go to the next slide. So the summary, I think that maybe Henrik, you wish to come back here. I don't know, but or I can also say it. That the traditional structure and investment fund managed and approved at local level, and the funding released from the budget in Brussels, it's a post-finance. The NGO and the recovery fund application are sent from local managing authority to the European Commission for approval, and only then will funds will be released. And it's only a repetition again that the plan has to come now between now and April, and the Commission has only 2 months to approve the plan, so it has to be ready by April. But in the normal years, which means 2022 and 2023, the draft plan should be sent to the European Commission before 15th of October, then negotiate and improve the text, and then the final decision will be in April 2022 for the next one. And then there is a third round. It's very important that you have to raise your hand, and the NRENs, together with the other research stakeholders, may approach their ministries who are responsible for the European semester. I think that in different countries, the European semester can be in different hands, but most likely it is in the hands of the Minister of Economy. So if your primary ministry you talk is not the Ministry of Economy, but Ministry of Education, for instance, and then you have to make sure that these connections are built between you and the ministry. And I think that we go to the next slide.
Okay.
And it's up to you to ask questions. Thank you.
Maybe perhaps thank you, Edith. Before I ask these questions, maybe I should just open the floor if anybody wants to ask any questions to Edith or myself regarding the previous part of the presentation. Arthur, I see you have a raised hand.
Yes, I have a question to Alberto regarding the value of your project. You didn't have a notification process in the EC?
Notification process of which kind?
There
is yearly the possibility to announce these projects to reduce the time of publication. And of course, all the tenders we've done are published because of the amount in the official journal.
Yeah, but a notification, it is usually must be for each project funded from the EU funds if you exceed threshold of the 50 million euro as a whole project.
Notification of which kind? I don't know.
That if the EU money is engaged, and
yes.
if the value of the project exceed 50 million euro,
50 or 15? Sorry.
50.
But then we have separate projects. We have one of 35 million for the renewal of our own infrastructure, and a very different project of 20 million or 25 million with external research institutions and regional academic networks to improve their infrastructure. So at this time, we do not have a project of more than 50 million. We had it in 2008. It was a project of 105 million euros, but it was back in 2008. Now we have separate projects that have a smaller amount. So we have never heard of this notification process, and we have had no problem with that.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe just to add that in case of the RRF, the notification will be the plan itself.
There are like fact sheets that we have had to prepare for the Spanish government. Edith was saying that rightly that you have to talk with the Ministry of Economy, and for strange reasons we happen to be in a ministry called Economic Affairs and Digital Transition. So we're in a quite good situation. We're closely in contact with the Ministry of Science, which is the owner of the network, but we manage it and procure new equipment and fiber. And we are also in contact with the Ministry for Universities. But we belong to the Ministry of Economy, and this might help because it's economy and digital transformation, and our institution, Red.ts, is digital transformation, and we manage also the research education network.
Thank you. Ronan, I see you have your hand up.
Thanks, Hendrik. One for Edith, I think. Edith, is RRF monies available at the start of the project or at the end of the project? Do I have to have an invoice?
It's against invoice.
Against invoice. So
against invoice.
So does that present sort of a cash flow problem? I would need to fund, the NREN would need to fund it, then reclaim.
Or the member state.
Or the member state, yeah.
Yeah, because here the beneficiary is the member state. Yeah.
Okay.
So the legal action is between the member state, who is responsible for the plan, and the European Commission, and therefore you have a right to go for a member state to ask help for investment. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ronan. Are there any more questions to Edith or Alberto or myself before I commence to the final slide? I don't see any raised hands. So, yeah, this is to round off today's presentation. This is the first time that EU Liaison have focused specifically on this type of funding and communicating it directly with NRENs. So we have 3 questions here, which it would be good if anybody here had some reflections. We would like to ask, does a series of info shares dedicated to this type of topic be something that you feel that European NRENs would benefit from? And on top of that, do you think there are any missing gaps or key pieces of information that you feel we should provide? And also, finally, are these info shares at the right level of detail? If anybody has any comments on these questions, it'd be much appreciated.
Hi, Hendrik. It's Annabelle here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh, hi. I'll turn on my video. Yeah. So I notice a lot of the information in the chat has been perhaps from countries who are within the GÉANT, members of the GÉANT Association, but not necessarily eligible for specific bits. And I think what might be useful is if we could be a bit clearer about, okay, so just like even just a mini table, associated countries can get this, EU countries are available for this, just so it's a little bit clearer. I agree, and I've felt for a long time that dedicated info shares or better sharing of information about what funding is available, and also knowledge sharing amongst NRENs of for example, Alberto, and I mean, Arthur, I know through PSNC has got a lot of experience. So it would be good to hear from NRENs whether they want more stuff. But for me, from what I'm seeing on the chat, perhaps a clarification from each of the different, associated countries, main countries, etc., might be helpful. But I don't know, it'd be interesting. Everyone's been quite quiet, so it'd be interesting to hear from the attendees.
Hendrik, may I ask you to go back to the slide number, the slide with all the funds on it?
Yeah, second.
Because maybe as we have all the countries here from the associated countries, this slide is interesting because this slide shows not the size of the amount available, but for what you can use. Yeah, so the Horizon Europe can be used here, the CEF, DEP, yeah, and these were the funds we were discussing today. But as we have here the countries from the associated countries, I'd like to mention this part. And if you look, the scope is very similar to the regional development funds. So it can be used for research, infrastructure, rollout technologies, and skills. And this is the neighborhood development international funds, the IPA 3 for the neighbor countries, and OCT for the countries which are far away from the European Union and they are not part of the European Union. Yeah, so if you look at the scope of those funds, then it's research, infrastructure, rolling out technologies and skills. And what is also important, that although those funds can be used for research and development, they are not necessarily will be the choice of the local countries to use the money for. Yeah, so those NRENs have also lobbied their ministries to make sure that those funds, the NDIC, the IPA 3, and the OCT funds, will be for the NRENs. Yeah, we didn't organize the special seminar on this, but I think that I'd like to mention it here, that you need a proactive engagement because the money can be used for other purpose too. So you are not the only applicants. And therefore, if you are not proactive, if you do not approach the ministry, then of course it's a bit more difficult for the GÉANT to get those funds together with you. Yeah? Maybe this is an important element.
Henrik, there's a couple of questions also in the chat. One from Leonie.
Okay, hang on. I'll just have a look.
The applicable programs out of other DGs such as DG RTD, DG Digit, that's, I mean, it's CEF and DEP are those that are available also to other DGs. So what we've looked here is actually not, you know, how the funding is distributed via the DGs, but the level up of what the fund, what sort of funding is actually available.
Okay, so the type of funding available, I think this might link back to what Annabelle raised as well, that it would be good to have an overview of all the different types of funding available, but also the linked into which countries they associated and how they're distributed at a third level. I think that would be a useful next step to conduct.
Yeah, we will probably need to start see how we can do it and if it is possible in an Excel spreadsheet and still understandable. I could imagine it's quite complicated. But I think Matthew has actually done the start of this sort of activity in one of the presentations he gave at the Infoshare.
Okay, well, we'll explore that avenue with him. I see Lars has raised his hand.
Yeah, so that was to that, right? That I think one of the things there is that there are so many programs and so many sources of funding, and we don't really have time to look at that, right? There are interesting space programs and space partnership agreements, and I don't know what, right? And maybe in that there is funding to be had for satellite-based internet or for expensive connectivity to downlink stations for, you know, or antenna dishes or whatever it is. And maybe there is not. And I think if each of us have to go and look for that, we run out of time. So we somehow have to pool resources. And I don't think you can do it because then you have to be a department of 40 people, right? And that doesn't scale. So we have to, I think, find a way to activate also us, the NRENs, and agree who will go and look at which program and figure out what's in it and report to the rest of us, right? Some of us, like Alberto and Arthur and so on, have a really good insight into some of these programs and can maybe spare me the time of looking at it. And then maybe I can look at the Arctic programs and see if there's anything for the rest of us to do, right? So I think if we can find a way to also orchestrate in that way, that would be really helpful. So that I don't have to go and look at all these programs because I have only 24 hours in my day.
Thank you, Lars. I think that's really important because within the EU liaison, we can of course have a start and make this spreadsheet, which we just discussed. But as Annabelle raised, this will not work for us as a community unless we leverage the knowledge within the NRENs. This is why we asked for Alberto to talk, and this is why we need to bring in these people who are specialists in these areas to talk to other NRENs. So I think a combination of the two would be very useful.
I'd like to say thanks for Lars for the offer. I think that it would be only interesting if we could do it together with the NRENs, because we have the overview. Yeah, we know of course which funds are where, but we do not really able to go to the very details, and we cannot define which is interesting for the entire community and only for a few within the community. And so it has to be a coordinated work with the NRENs. Not the EU liaison need coordinate support from you to make it perfect or better.
Thank you, Edith. Are there any remaining questions to us here?
Maybe just to Leonie, to reply to Leonie, that the digit projects will be under the CEF program.
Thanks, Edith. So the last line we have here is the EU liaison. We've already identified other types of funds, which we think, well, facilities, programs, which we need to explain to NRENs in more detail. But we're definitely going to take that feedback in of having a wider just overview of which countries are eligible and which funds are where in the simplest possible way. So we'll definitely start collecting that information together for you.
Maybe Hendrik, to repeat it once more, that both the European Regional Development Funds and the Resilience and Recovery Fund facility can be used as a 50% co-finance rate for the CEF or the DEP programs. So there is an addition, not only that the fresh money is coming to you, but it can double by the central budget under the Connecting and the Develop Digital Europe facility programs.
Exactly, and this is something we'd have to highlight. This is when we discussed if we wanted to include all of these funds within this presentation or divide it into two. I think that's something we'd have to highlight in the next InfoShare if we're going to discuss CEF and the Digital Europe program.
So Edith, did I get that right? That I can use CEF2 funding and recovery funding in combination, that the recovery funding is the 50% matching funding for the CEF funding?
Absolutely, yeah. Both the ERDF funds and the RRF funds can be used, but then the member state has to mention it. Yeah. So the member state has to put it to the plan that they put it as a matching part of the CEF program or the DEP program. And maybe Hendrik, if you would go down to the very last 2 pages to show the template of the plan, how the plan should look like, and then maybe one more page. Yeah. So you see that in the part 3 of the template of the country report or of the country plan, they are asking for CEF, DEP, and Horizon Europe. And they ask for the complementarity. Yeah, so the member state has to ask for it.
Yeah, I just didn't realize that meant I could use one program to be the 50% of the other program, but that's very useful. Thank you.
Yeah, there is a link. There is a link for the document on the upper page. If you go 1 page up, Hendrik. Yeah, so you can find here the template and get familiar with it.
Thanks.
Thank you, Edith. Are there any more questions for us today?
Could we have access to this presentation?
Yes, we'll make it available to you, Arta. I need to check in with Magda because this is part of the new series. So I'm not completely accustomed with how it will be made available, but it will be, and you will know.
We just added to the wiki page.
Okay. Well, if that is the end of the InfoShare, I'd like to thank everybody for attending the first in this series of topics. The feedback's much appreciated, and be prepared to hear from us in the near future. But
and
before
call your ministries. Talk to your ministries now if you didn't do it so far.
Before you leave, though, however, I'd like to hand over quickly to Magda, because she has some information regarding this, the InfoShare series we're now running within GÉANT, and there should be some useful information for you here.
Yes, I just wanted to, in very few words, to make you aware what's going on with the InfoShares. So as there was a huge interest from the community, we're organizing these events now on a regular basis. They happen every Wednesday. These are the InfoShares meant to general public, and they're recorded. And then we also host a few InfoShares that are for very specific audience, and they're organized on the different days of the week. There is a wiki page where you probably got across this event. So all the other InfoShares are stored also there. And we also created a page with suggestions. So if you have any suggestions for future topics of interest, you're welcome to go to the wiki page and you'll find a link directing you to the suggestion page. So please contribute. And the last thing I wanted to add, that the recordings of the public InfoShares are always shared on the same wiki page, as well as on eAcademy and the GLEP website. If you have any inquiries, any questions, any comments, more suggestions, more personalized suggestions, you're welcome to contact Partner Relations team of GÉANT. Thank you.
Thank you, Magda. And with that, I close the InfoShare. Thank you very much to everybody who attended.